All right, so hello everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Josh Levitt, and I work with the Alumni Relations team here at the University of Chicago. Thank you again for joining us for this special event in our Young Professional series. This event is hosted by the Alumni Career Programs team. Our goal is to create resources and programs to help you grow in your career. Today, we will hear from a fellow college classmate of mine, a multidisciplinary graphic designer who you may recognize, whose work you may recognize from the University of Chicago magazine, from the Thinkers Toys woodblock prints, and so on. And he's since established himself as a brand identity expert at Firebelly, which is based in Portland. So Tom, take it away.
Thanks, Josh. So I am based in Portland, but Firebelly Design is actually based in Chicago.
I got it reversed. So strike that, reverse it.
Oh, good. Okay. Welcome, and I'm going to open with just a little spiel about myself. As Josh said, I am an alumnus of the college where I got my degree in political science back in 2010. So I graduated into a easier job market than I think the classes of say 08 or 09. But I emerged with sort of a portfolio from my time working at the Chicago Maroon. I don't know if we have any newspaper geeks in the audience here. But there I had started out as a political cartoonist and did illustration work, photography, and then I was the managing editor for my fourth year. And in the meantime, I did do a production design internship for a payday loan outfit in Chicago, which I'm not terribly proud of in hindsight. But it was an introduction to the world of graphic design and commercial art. So after I graduated, I moved back in with my parents, and I did two internships. One was paid, one was unpaid. They were both in design. One was a production design job in the suburbs for a business-to-business agency, and it was very like it's very, I hesitate to say rote work, but it's work that's ultimately important. So production work means you are preparing files for print, you're resizing ads, you're not necessarily generating entirely new things so much as working with existing designs that someone else has put together. But it's something that's also very important because that's how you get things to actually live out in the world, whether that's a print piece or something as seemingly lowly quote as a banner ad. So it was really good for sort of cutting my teeth on these jobs, and they were also very, very heavily time boxed in the sense of I would literally be told that I have half an hour to crank out this thing, or an hour to do so. And the other internship was ostensibly a packaging design, but really sort of mixture of sort of design tasks for a sustainable packaging design company in Chicago called Distant Village, which I think is still around. And there I had a little bit more latitude, but it was kind of a less than sort of exciting gig. So when working full-time as the production design intern for the B2B agency, I did that instead. And in the interim, because I was living with my parents, there was a certain amount of stability and definitely kind of a privilege of being in that position. So I did a lot of illustration work and design work for my friends from college who were off doing their own things elsewhere. And that way I was able to build up more of my portfolio sort of off on the side. And I left that production design internship and then kind of freelance for a little bit. And that was a kind of mixture of like odd jobs. I was doing some photography on the side. Um, and uh, that lasted about uh, half a year, I think. And then I got a job working at the university because uh, once you're a Chicagoan, the university never lets you go. And I actually worked where Josh is working now in alumni relations and development as one of 4 designers. And there it was a mix of mostly print, but some web work. I designed the now old alumni association website, but that was my first big web project actually. And I stayed there for about 3 years. I actually really enjoy the amount of creative latitude that was given me. But I left in 2015 because it was ultimately still an in-house kind of job, and I wanted to work on a broader variety of clients and work in different styles. Um, and so I applied for this job at Firebelly Design, and it was it was in hindsight kind of fortuitous that I actually didn't know the studio's more recent work. They're very highly regarded in the design space as one of the first outfits to really lean into the like social good sector. And I have been working with Firebelly Design since 2015. So, and now I am a senior designer. If you had a chance to take a look at my portfolio earlier, you might have seen it before my uh, belated portfolio update. So it was horribly out of date, and it now finally includes work from my time at Firebelly, which is quite different from what I had at U Chicago. But also because this is an AMA, and in the interest of time, I would be happy to jump to folks' questions if that is what folks would prefer.
Yeah, I think Tom, you have the right idea. Let's open up the conversation. Don't worry. We'll retrace some of Tom's steps in terms of his larger career journey. I know an important part of that journey is I know that you came here from China at the age of 9. Is that right? And then like really over the course of just of your of your academic trajectory and then your professional trajectory, like you have been very purposive in really learning like all that you can and really being an advocate for yourself. So I was wondering, like, maybe like could you start with like describing how that has served, how that approach has served you?
Hmm. I think I think the kind of through line is this, and this is definitely kind of double-edged sword, is being that outsider, right? Because in certain contexts you could be regarded as a curio, or it could definitely feel alienating on a sort of personal level. Um, there's been much broader acknowledgement, I think, of imposter syndrome recently, and that I will say that that's just not something that ever that ever leaves you. Um, so the advantage, though, is that as an outsider, you are in a position to offer a perspective that insiders don't necessarily have. Whether or not that's being too meshed in industry jargon to be able to speak to a different audience, or even say recognizing that the sort of like customary way that something is done might not be the most effective or efficient way that something could be done. Um, so I I think that's all part of it. Um, as for my own kind of immigrant background, surprisingly that hasn't really come up that often. I think because what was it, like the like second generation, though I'm kind of a 1.5 gen immigrant, like uh that's a generation that's interested in assimilating. So I think I kind of pass in that way for someone who was born here. um so it's something that I don't necessarily feel super comfortable bringing up in this sort of like professional context.
Mhm.
um but but I think that sort of other motif is something that definitely has been a part of my sort of personal narrative.
Excellent. And how did you come to graphic design? Because you were a political science major, right? So, right,
Yes.
how did that happen?
What a wonderful, serious concentration, political science. Definitely not a goof off major. No. So uh, I I would say that it was really more of a meandering path. Uh, I started out actually doing political cartoons, mostly because I like from a very young age to like high school, I had mostly done like drawing and then cartooning because I'll be honest, I don't have the patience to say like paint and do things that are very detailed like that. Um, and I went to the RSO fair first year of college, which I think a lot of folks will also remember, uh, and went to the Maroons booth and just literally said, "Hey, are you guys looking for political cartoonists?" And the person who was there said, "Yes, we are," um, and that's how things got started. But um, the summer internship at the payday loan agency was actually that was actually my that was my introduction to graphic design. um, and it was I was muted for a second there. Okay. And that was something I had thought was kind of intimidating because it it felt like you had to possess a certain degree of like expertise and training to be part of that. Um, and that's something that over time I sort of an attitude I shed because I kind of realized that, oh yeah, there's sort of a common theme here in that they're all visual communicative arts. Um, but from there, I went back, and when I went back, I decided, okay, like design's the thing I can do. Um, but I really wasn't doing much of that still for the paper. I did join another RSO called The Mark, which was all about really advertising, and did more design work in that capacity. And the same time, I was friends with the photo editors and photographers back at the paper, so got into photography. And then kind of when the managing editor rotated out, I put myself in that position and said, yeah, maybe I'll do this, and uh, took the liberty of redesigning the whole paper, because I could, and yeah, that is sort of the early trajectory.
Fantastic. Let's turn to some of the questions in the chat, and then I have some more. Uh, so one comes from our friend Ken Lang. Hey, welcome back. Uh, So he writes in that he feels like a lot of folks who are interested in engaging in social service oriented work don't really consider careers in graphic design or advertising as options. So could you share your thoughts on the applicability of a background in graphic design and or advertising in like efforts like to serve others?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very, very pertinent, just underappreciated. Um, because it's not as if nonprofits or other actors in the social services sector don't need to communicate. And ultimately, graphic design is about the visual communication of X, Y, or Z. So, for instance, if we're talking about something in like the public sector or sort of civic design realm, if you're working for a government agency, they still need designers because they send out say like mailers or emails, or they have web presences, and there uh, you can't just throw up a wall of text set in Times New Roman and expect people to really consider that to be a friendly experience. So there are aspects about the private sector or advertising and so on that are very much applicable. You might not be in the business of say like maximizing your profits, for instance, but you probably want people to know that this service exists and that when they interact with that service, that it will be a pleasant experience. Um, and visually, that would mean setting your text in a font that's pleasant and well typeset for easy time reading. If it's something that's interactive, to make sure that it meets accessibility standards, that users will have a very clear time distinguishing what it is they're supposed to do, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, that reminds me of some other good questions that have come in. So, for example, you talked about designing for to meet accessibility standards. You mentioned fonts, you mentioned colors. So, like, how do you balance, meeting, say, multiple readerships at once? For instance, how do you design for readers who, may be elderly? How do you design for readers who may be colorblind? How do you factor all that in when you're approaching a project?
Yeah, so fortunately, there are industry guidelines and standards established through practice that you can consult. WCAG is the web accessibility standard keeper, and they publish guidelines on like what like degree of color contrast you need to be able to have something legible for audiences of different degrees of like vision acuity, and including color blindness. And these days, for something like, I mean, especially web design, there are often built-in sort of either built-in or add-on accessibility checkers that you can use, and it's literally as simple as here's color A, here's color B. The computer does the analysis for you and says, okay, like these two colors meet contrast guidelines, these two don't. Um, and as
Okay.
for things like type sizes, uh, that that is that depends on the medium that you're working in. In print's a little bit different. Um, and I think the rule of thumb is like, 6 points is the absolute tiniest font that you should set in print. Online, I would say like 14 is like the minimum for like paragraph text. And these days I tend to set it at like even 16 or 20 pixels, depending on the application.
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
I should say that the best way to also find out is to actually if you have the resources and time to actually just put something in front of the expected end user and ask them, hey, like, is this something that is easy and comfortable for you to read and interface with?
Right, so in that way you can sort of take some of the guesswork out of it,
Oh
even
yeah.
like as you right, even as you apply some of the like established principles and standards. Uh, so let's say you're pivoting into towards graphic design. One of our friends here says that she is a business analyst interested in pivoting towards graphic design via Kickstarter illustrated book campaign. So are there additional ways to launch? Like, how do you launch yourself as a graphic designer?
Ooh. I think launch is, at least in my personal experience, kind of maybe less applicable. Um, I think it's more of a kind of slow accumulation. Um, I did self-publish uh, an illustrated anthology once upon a time, and that was purely a personal project. And I think part of that is just, I mean, a lot of things that in hindsight were, not terribly exciting things, uh, but sort of point you uh, in more of a direction or introduce you to more people. So as much as I hate saying this, going to network functions, joining things like AIGA, which is the American Institute for Graphic Arts, and that's the professional organization for graphic designers. They do things like networking events and conferences, and it can definitely be intimidating going to a networking event where you don't know anyone, and you're also not in the industry. But trust me, designers would rather talk about something that's not design. So if you have other areas of expertise, you will strike up conversations with other folks.
You hear that? That's the importance of making those connections, firming up those connections. Small plug toward the end of this series, we'll have a young professionals networking night, so definitely look out for that. Because no matter what industry you go into, it's essential to meet like-minded people or meet people who know like-minded people. um, so so that's one skill. Definitely, we have a few questions in general. Like, what are some of the like tools, techniques, software, certifications, like beyond fine-tuning Illustrator skills? Like, what what sort of what sort of set of skills do people really need to develop today to get into the field?
Um, I think if you ask this question maybe like 5 years ago, I would definitely say, just the Adobe Creative Suite, and sort of like at the very minimum, Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign, the big three. Um, Nowadays, I would say, and then possibly, Adobe Premiere Pro and After Effects for motion work. Uh, Today, I would say definitely those. Uh, I make extensive use of a program called Figma, Figma, for web design and interactive design, um, and it is a fantastic program. Um, the other big UI UX program is Sketch, which some of you may have heard of. Um, so those are I would say the sort of core suite of things I use. I also at this point feel pretty comfortable working in Blender, which is an open source and free to download 3D rendering, animation, and modeling program. And I also have some experience creating data visualizations in RStudio, and that's a statistical programming language. And I also do some GIS work as a geographic information systems work through another open source program called QGIS. Um, so, but bit of a broad spread, but I would say my core competencies are still, yeah, uh, Adobe, Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign. I do use After Effects more than I do Premiere Pro, which is really more of a video editing program. And then Figma is my sort of like day to day, and with a side of Blender, and then the GIS programs.
So you would not, I guess, you would not necessarily recommend, say, an MFA?
Uh, I I don't think I would recommend it. I I think MFA as a sort of terminal master's program is very useful as a credential if you want to go into teaching.
Mm.
And a lot of designers do have teaching positions as somewhat of a fallback for when the market's rough, because it has a certain degree of job security, and we know that like folks return to say graduate school or continuing ed under those circumstances. Uh, but I think if you really also want to be in a very sort of like intense environment with other people who are of a similar kind of intensity, um, and uh, I think that's a good place for that. Um, and obviously, like for networking and making connections within the industry, is also not a bad idea. In terms of the cost benefit of that, I can't really weigh that for you. Personally, I don't think it's definitely not a necessity.
That's very helpful. And just as long as we're on the topic of like entering the field, I know I was reading that the projected growth for careers in graphic design is uh, is about 3% growth from 2020 to 2030, which is a little slower than average, than average for all occupations, but that still means about 24,000 openings for graphic design projected each year on average, over the decade. So that's to say that like that those like that though there will be those opportunities for people in graphic design, to get into the field. Um, and I guess I'm wondering, for those who are keeping that, like, how do you find those opportunities? How do you find those openings? What does the landscape seem to look like for like employment options in graphic design?
Yeah, so I would say that the most remunerative positions are kind of where you would expect, meaning mostly tech. So you're working in UI UX design, app design. Motion work is also similarly well paying, mostly because it is a lot of work and it's very time consuming to do. Um, but that's not necessarily such a huge sort of like growth sector. And if you're doing say like UI UX work, um, it really helps to be able to do motion as well, because everyone wants cute little animations for micro interactions and so forth. Uh, for branding and sort of visual identity work, which is my bread and butter these days, that I can't really speak to, mostly because I haven't been job hunting actively for the last 7 years or so. But there the kind of pipeline is either or the kind of pipeline that is usually, and this kind of weirdly enough mirrors iBanking in a way, like you graduate with something like a BFA, or you're out of undergrad, you work at a big agency for a little bit, and you either burn out or get bored or what have you, and then you either move to a smaller studio, um, like Firebelly has like 10 people total, or you go work in house, meaning you're on the design team within a company, um, and that's sort of usually how that tracks out. Um, I would say that I I don't remember off the top of my head if the Bureau of Labor Statistics considers like um, web design and like interaction design to be a different category than graphic design writ large. Um, but my impression is that like print is definitely not it. Print is not really the place to be if you're looking just for growth. Definitely something that's at the very least mixed media and definitely in tech, which is not great news, I think, to just have all that growth concentrated in certain sectors. But
Yes.
yeah,
And it does sound like, as you pointed out earlier, that organizations in various sectors ultimately will need um, will need to communicate messaging, uh, you know, through web platforms, through print, through email, and so on. And so they will need at least freelance work in that like visual identity, brand identity space. Certainly, if they're working with multiple populations. Um, and in that, I mean, in that vein, our friend Rich Cruz asks, put notes right that you started as an independent freelancer, and you now work as a senior designer. Uh, but do you still need to, market yourself and bring in and retain those clients?
I don't, and it's mostly because I did a little bit of that when uh, so when in like the half year leading up to when I left in alumni relations and development, I did some more freelancing, and at the time, working full time for ARD and freelancing was sustainable because I mean ARD is not a sleepy outfit per se, but it's not like a 60 hours a week kind of position. So there was time for me to moonlight. And then when I started working at Firebelly, I realized that wait, like the work I'm doing is more interesting and demanding of me. So I dropped the freelance side of things. So these days I'm really not available for commission, um, just out of a desire for a saner work-life balance.
Sure. Yeah. Uh, so I guess we've held off um, long enough. Let's see the evolution of your work, of your look. Uh, let's see some examples of your early pieces, and maybe if you can, some of the things that you've done more recently or that you're working on now. Any political cartoons these days, even just for fun?
No, I have not done any political cartoons in quite a while. Illustrations, yes. Political cartoons, no. uh, so this is probably the portfolio that some of you have seen, and this represents roughly the stuff I've done from 2011 to 2015 or so. Uh, and as you'll see, a lot of it is It is about Chicago. Sorry, I have a cat here who is scratching at me to get onto my lap. So there we go. Okay. So when I worked at Chicago, one of the things that I mentioned was that for an in-house job, there was a certain degree of creative latitude. Um, so what that meant in practice was like being able to work on something like the core, which is the college's supplemental magazine and companion piece to the general alumni mag. And this was a sort of cover-to-cover redesign of an existing publication. And because my my boss trusted me enough to work with this at the time, I had a lot of say in both doing, say, just like illustration work, so spot illustrations, for instance, to actually a lot of the photography, um, like the recipe photos, and was something that I shot for, I think, virtually every issue. And actually, that's my hand in the middle over there, holding up that photo. But
So we got to add hand model to your resume.
yeah, and if folks, I don't know if anyone here has any socks from the time that they did like socks as a donation gift, but that's it feels kind of weird, but that's actually my feet too in those photos. You can add sock model. You can
Yeah.
add sock model to that. The Thinkers toys are also quite fun, and I do look back upon these pretty fondly. I think I still have a few bags of these lying around the desk somewhere. And this was just a fun, sort of purely illustrative project. Uh, and if you have these, you know that they're about like two inches wide and 1.5 inches tall thereabouts. And this was just a fun project where I also got to take a lot of reference photos, and it was a matter of figuring out like how do we use just one color, in this case our good old Chicago maroon, to represent these architecturally complex forms. Um, and here that was also an economical decision, because printing these in multiple colors obviously adds to the expense, um, and also and just general production times. Um, and that was definitely quite a fun piece. So when I started to think about sort of moving on, that's when I took some freelance jobs at outside of Chicago. Uh, and this is also, by the way, a pretty good argument for being out there and meeting people. So Carlos Javier Ortiz is a really, really good documentary photographer, uh, and I met him actually through a completely informal channel, which is when the Occupy Wall Street / Occupy Chicago protests were going on in 2010, 2011. I ran into him, and he was shooting with a Leica rangefinder camera, which is which is really rare. And so I was also a photo nerd and got into a conversation with him. And then when the sort of big uh, anti-NATO protests rolled around, we ran into each other on the streets again, and we're like, hey, like, he suggested, how about we like, carpool basically every day to this thing, and from there we started talking about some of his other projects, and I told him, oh yeah, like I'm a designer, because he mentioned that he was designing books. And he asked me if I design any books, and I said, sure. I had not designed any books by this point, but this was definitely it was a long running project too. Um, and he was working on this documentary about the depredations of gun violence, and particularly gun violence between young folk in Chicago. And this was actually funded through Kickstarter project, but this took, oh god, more than a year to put together, I think. Um, but it was definitely a chance to work with something that was very that was still in the same medium but outside the Chicago brand, being able to work with different different typefaces, and being able to leverage some of the like things that you can do in print that you can't really do as well online, like this unfurling memorial of the names of young folks who were killed by gun violence, for instance, and being able to make that sort of statement through like the physicality of a piece. And the other big freelance thing that I did during this time was this set of illustrations for Ideo. And this was definitely probably the most intense moonlighting project that I had uh, at the time, because there were, God, I think like daily check-ins, which meant that before I had to get to the office at 9, I had to be at IDEO's offices to to check in with their team. And I did tell my boss that this was going on at the same time. So you know it was very much above board. But it was definitely fun working in this like much more geometric style. Whereas, you know, I had come from this place of working with a lot of ink, a lot of wash drawings. This was done for the university sustainability program, and I personally am still still uh, quite fond of this thing. Um, and you know, definitely a shift stylistically. Um, and I think this was definitely one of the projects that kind of set me up to be able to leave Huge Chicago in a sense. Um, so what have I done at Firebelly since then? Well, a lot of things is the answer. So um, I I definitely did uh, little to no signage work at U Chicago. And one of the things I got into a lot more at Firebelly was doing wayfinding and what's called environmental design. And it has some crossover with interior design and architecture. But here, for instance, it was designing this both all the graphics that are on these panels, but also the structure itself. Uh, so these sort of walnut or no oak slats, for instance, uh, as well as you know the kind of like physical interactions that are part of this piece. So there was a matter of specking all these out, um, working very closely with the fabricator to figure out, okay, like what engineering improvements do we need to make this thing strong, but also meeting these initial specifications for you know something that we can ship on site, flat packed, assemble without any tools, and also disassemble without any tools. Uh, and this is also a reusable piece, and it's now I think sitting in the atrium of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, which you may remember from their uh, NPR sponsorships, but they are the nation's biggest public health philanthropy, and they do a lot of work in the public or sorry, in the health equity space these days. Otherwise, let's take a look at. So Firebelly has this program called Grant for Good, which is the pro bono arm of the studio where we donate a year's worth of design and strategy services to an organization that you know meet certain criteria. And the Chicago Freedom School was the recipient in 2017, and they're modeled after the freedom schools during the civil rights era. And this is a very much a social justice oriented organization specifically for BIPOC youths, or BIPOC young people. and it's the sort of like non-hierarchical after school slash extracurricular program. So we did a pretty full sort of suite of deliverables for them. Starting from the logo, where we have this sort of flower-like symbol that references the sort of like circular, non-hierarchical class structure that they have, but also this sort of sense of being in this community surrounded by people who are like you, who are like-minded, who share your goals, but also the sense of kind of ambiguity, like, yes, things also point toward the center, but you can just as easily read that as radiating outward. So that's sort of like internal and external momentum. And being able to then use components of that piece. I'm not sure if you can entirely see, but sort of pieces of the logo can kind of come apart and become sort of framing elements for different collateral. And there was also a web component for this. And this was also actually my first big project using Sketch, as opposed to Adobe InDesign, which looking back, like how on earth did I ever use that program for web design? But from there, there are lots of other there are a couple other projects that I haven't included just because I kind of ran out of time, not gonna lie. Girls Garage is one of my actually all-time favorite projects. So this has also been a sort of a recurring relationship. And they started out as a Grant for Good recipient, but they've since come back to the studio as paying clients. But they are based in Berkeley, in the Bay Area, and they started out as a like girls only sort of sub program of a bigger program called Project H, that was all about instilling confidence and also technical skills through lots of like design, architecture, and sort of hands-on building programs. And then Girls Garage became wildly successful, and then it became its own sort of independent organization. And they approached us and wanted to have something that was not, overtly feminine, that wasn't cliched. So this was also my first foray into typography design. But here, we wanted something that really felt bold and, to use their term, badass, and is rooted in the sort of like stenciled, roughly kind of hewn industrial aesthetic. We commissioned, custom portraits. I also did a number of these like hand-drawn illustrations, and yeah, and this to toot my own horn for a little, this project was also featured on Brand New, which if you follow the sort of like branding and design world, is a digital publication that is now a paywall, but is still very like highly considered in the industry. So felt a little smug about that for a
You
little bit.
should. Yeah, congratulations. Yeah, thank you for taking us through the evolution of your and the variety of different projects. And as you can see, a lot of it is, from like, visual elements to typographical elements, from web to print to like actual, signage, very, those are all very visual, tactile, in very different ways. And just to circle back to an earlier an earlier question point, it also seems like one way to get into the social service and advocacy space through graphic design is actually through that sort of work with various organizations. So thank you for that insight as well, and I can tell you're proud of that work that you've done there. Especially if you could turn it from pro bono to paid clients. Since I want to be mindful and respectful of your time and of our guests, so last question: pick a trend that you're seeing now in graphic design. Tell us why it is your favorite or your least favorite trend.
Oh, I guess this has been an ongoing trend for a while. There's a certain like corporate illustration style that's, I think, called like corporate Memphis. And let's see if we can pull that up. Yeah, it is. I think the contemporary equivalent of the sort of like Swiss international here's a very basic kind of supposedly neutral style. Ostensibly it's supposed to have more personality, and it has a lot of these sort of illustrations of very like fairly geometric figures with exaggerated proportions, often with relatively few facial features. So sort of still like depersonalized in that sense. And there's definitely a lot of it out there. And I think there, what I like about it is that when it's well done, it can work very well. I think where it begins to get a little kind of wearing is so many people do it that it just has become kind of cliched or rote on in that way. So that is probably the one trend that I find both encouraging and kind of annoying at the same time. And I would probably say the other one is variable fonts, which I really like in theory. So if you're not familiar, a variable font is so think of your like regular font as having different weights, right? Different thicknesses, from like light to regular to like bold to like black, which is the heaviest weight. And there's nothing in between. Variable fonts sort of fill in those in-betweens with a hypothetically kind of like infinite number of gradations. And that variability can also extend beyond just how thick the letter forms are. It can be a change in overall proportion, so narrower letters, wider ones. And I think you can create some really cool things with it. As far as creating something that's very systematic in the sort of like brand space is concerned, it can be really tough, and licensing costs are just so much more expensive because of that. So yeah, it definitely very exciting from a sort of like nerding out about typography perspective. Practical use and cost can get a little dicey.
Thank you. Yeah, that's it's one of those things when you point it out, now we're going to see it everywhere. Think about it a little more. Thank you again for everyone who attended. We really appreciate, Tom, your insights, professional, artistic, and otherwise. I want to invite everyone to join us for the rest of the Young Professional series. I'm dropping 2 links in the chat. One is to tell us your thoughts on this conversation. So take a look for that. And the other one is a link to the rest of the series. We'll continue with such events as freelancing with your creativity and interviewing for introverts, along with the Young Professionals networking night to wrap up the series. Tom Tian, thank you so much for being with us today. And we look forward to seeing some more of your looks.
All right, thanks, folks. It's been a pleasure being able to share my my perspective with you all, and yeah, have a great rest of your week.
All right, take care.
Bye, folks.